The sound started just after 1 in the morning. I remember checking my watch. The luminous dial glowed faint green in the darkness. 01:30, August 21st, 1942. We were dug in along the west bank of what the maps called Alligator Creek, though it wasn't a creek at all. It was a tidal lagoon, green water, stagnant, the kind that breeds disease and smells like death even before the dying begins. The air was thick, Guadalcanal thick, the kind of humidity that makes your uniform stick to your skin, makes every breath feel like drowning. We'd been waiting 3 days, waiting in that jungle darkness, listening to the sounds, insects, birds, things we couldn't name, and underneath it all, the ocean, always the ocean. Then came the screaming, not the battle screaming, not yet. First came their war cries, rolling across that sandbar like a wave. Banzai! Banzai! Hundreds of voices, and we thought, God help us, we thought it would be over by morning. We thought we'd win, and they'd retreat, and we'd bury the dead, and move on. We were right about one part. We won. But the screaming didn't stop at dawn. It started at 01:30 and went on and on and on, hour after hour, until the sun came up and we sent in the tanks. His name was Ichiki, Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki, a man who believed in the superiority of spirit over steel, of courage over firepower, of the warrior's will over the Marines' machine gun. He wrote in his journal 3 days before, 21st August, enjoyment of the fruit of victory. He was wrong about the date, he was wrong about the victory, but he was right about one thing. There would be no enjoyment. Not for him, not for us, not for anyone who heard what we heard that night. The Marines called it the sandbar, 30 yards of coral sand, pale even in starlight, stretching from our side of the lagoon to theirs. A natural causeway, a killing ground. We'd spent 2 days preparing, a single strand of barbed wire running from the jungle's edge down to the surf. 2 37mm guns loaded with canister shot. Imagine a shotgun shell the size of your fist, filled with steel balls. Machine gun nests every 20 yards. Artillery pre-registered on coordinates we'd measured twice, then measured again. I was there with the 1st Marines. We'd been on that island less than 2 weeks, still figuring out the jungle, still learning that the real enemy wasn't just the Japanese. It was the heat, the insects, the water that gave you dysentery, the coral that infected every cut, the jungle that rotted your feet inside your boots. But we were Marines. We could handle it. We told ourselves that. Lieutenant Colonel Pollock commanded our battalion. Good man, WWI veteran. He walked the line that afternoon, checking every position. They'll come at night, he said. Probably straight across. They think we're weak. They think they can sweep through us and take the airfield. He was right about the first part. They came at night. The waiting was worse than the fighting. We waited and waited and waited. The jungle makes sounds in the darkness, rustling, snapping, things moving in the undergrowth. Every sound becomes a Japanese soldier. Every shadow becomes an attack. Your finger stays on the trigger until it cramps. Your eyes strain into the darkness until you see things that aren't there. But some things were there. We heard them gathering on the far bank. Voices, low at first, then louder. Officers giving orders. Men responded. The sound of hundreds of soldiers preparing to die. Because that's what they were doing. Preparing to die. We just didn't understand it yet. We thought they were preparing to fight. There's a difference. The first wave hit at 01:30. I heard the battle cry before I saw them. Banzai! 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 It rolled across that lagoon like thunder. Then they came. Dark shapes against darker water, running across that sandbar in a column, tight formation, bayonets fixed, and we opened fire. The 37mm guns fired first. Canister shot at 30 yards. I watched the front of that column just disappear, not fall, not drop, disappear. 1 second there were men running. The next second there was red mist, and the rest kept coming. Machine guns next. Browning 30 caliber, 600 rounds per minute. The tracers lit up the night, red streaks cutting through the darkness, finding flesh, finding bone. The sound was continuous, not separate shots, but one long roar, like fabric tearing, like the world ending. They kept coming. Some made it to the wire. I watched them trying to cross, getting tangled, getting cut down. Some made it through. 3, maybe 4 reached our line. Hand-to-hand fighting in the dark. Rifle butts, bayonets, knives. The kind of fighting where you smell the other man's breath, feel his blood on your hands. Reserve Marines came up, killed them all. The first wave stopped. Not retreated, stopped. The ones who weren't dead were dying. The ones who weren't dying were wounded. And they started making sounds. Not screaming yet. Not the real screaming. Just sounds, gasps, moans, calls for help in Japanese we couldn't understand but recognized anyway. The universal language of pain. Hold your positions, Pollock ordered. Watch for a second wave. We held, we watched, and at 02:30 they came again. The second attack came from the same place, same sandbar. same approach, as if the dead piled there meant nothing, as if seeing what happened to the first wave changed nothing. Later I learned why. It was called Yamato Damashi, the spirit of old Japan, the belief that will could overcome bullets, that courage could defeat machine guns, that death in battle was preferable to any alternative. They were warriors. We were just Marines with orders to hold a line. They charged. We fired. It happened again. This time they tried to spread out, to make themselves harder targets. It didn't matter. The machine guns swept the sandbar left to right, right to left. The artillery found range, shells dropping among them with that particular sound, that crump that you feel in your chest before you hear it. I saw one Japanese officer reach the barbed wire. He got his sword tangled in it. Yes, a sword, an actual ceremonial sword, and stood there, pulling at it while the bullets found him. He fell still holding that sword. At dawn I saw it there, half out of the scabbard, covered in rust that wasn't rust. The second wave died the same way the first one did, nearly completely wiped out. That's what the official report said later. Nearly completely wiped out. Clean words for an unclean thing, but nearly meant survivors, wounded survivors. And as the second wave's attack broke apart, as the living fell back and the dead stayed where they fell, the sounds grew worse. Now there was screaming, real screaming, the kind that starts high and stays there, the kind that makes every man on the line flinch even though we'd won, even though we'd held. Because there's something about that sound, about hearing a man in agony calling for help you can't give, that gets inside you and stays there. "Sir," one of my Marines said. He was young, maybe 19. "Sir, shouldn't we?" "No," I said, "we stay here." "But I know what they are. We stay here." Because we'd already learned. We'd already buried the men who tried to help wounded Japanese soldiers. We'd already scraped our buddies' remains off the jungle floor after they approached someone they thought was dying and discovered the dying man had saved one grenade just for that moment. So we stayed, we listened, and we waited for the third wave. The third attack came around 5 in the morning. Different this time. They tried flanking through the surf, through the ocean itself, thinking the water would give them cover. The artillery found them anyway, shells dropping into the breakers, bodies in the foam. By 05:30, it was over. The battle part anyway, but the night wasn't over. Dawn was coming but hadn't arrived. And in that strange twilight, not quite dark, not quite light, we could see them now. Bodies on the sandbar, bodies in the water, bodies caught in the wire, and the ones who weren't bodies yet, the wounded, they lay where they'd fallen. Some moved, some didn't. Some called out, some just made sounds, low sounds, animal sounds, the sounds men make when they're beyond words. "Request permission to assist enemy wounded, sir." That was Corporal Hendricks. Good Marine, good man. He'd been a medic before transferring to infantry. Denied. "Sir, they're suffering. They need—" "I know what they need." Permission denied. "Sir, do you remember Private First Class Wilson, Corporal?" He went quiet. We all remembered Wilson. 2 days earlier, found a wounded Japanese soldier at the edge of the jungle. The man was gut-shot, dying. Wilson was a Christian, real one, not just Sunday morning. He couldn't walk past suffering. He knelt beside that dying man, opened his canteen. The Japanese soldier shot him in the face with a pistol he'd kept concealed. Then he used his last strength to pull the pin on a grenade he'd been holding. They both died. So no, we weren't approaching the wounded. Not in the dark, not in the twilight, not until we could see clearly, until we could be certain, until we could protect ourselves. And by then, it would be too late to help them anyway. So we listened. You want to know what it sounded like? I'll tell you, though I've spent 80 years trying to forget. Some of them screamed, high-pitched, constant, the sound of torn muscle and shattered bone and pain beyond describing. Those were the ones hit in the gut, in the groin, in the places where dying takes hours instead of minutes. Some of them called out names, probably, mothers, probably, words we couldn't understand but recognized. Every language has words for help and mother and please, and those words sound the same when a man is dying. Some of them sang battle songs, marching songs, songs to keep themselves conscious, to keep themselves alive, to pretend they weren't dying alone in the dark on a sandbar 5,000 miles from home. Some of them prayed. We could hear the cadence, even if we couldn't hear the words. The rhythm of prayer is universal, the desperate bargaining with God when you know he's not listening. And some of them were silent, the worst kind of silence. The silence of men who were still alive but had gone beyond sound, into that place where pain becomes everything, where the body shuts down everything except the raw fact of suffering. I sat in my fighting hole and listened. We all did. Couldn't talk about it, couldn't acknowledge it, just sat there in the tropical night, in the heat, in the smell of cordite and blood and jungle rot, and listened to men die. "We could just shoot them," someone said. Private Johnson, he was crying. Tough kid, farm boy from Nebraska, but he was crying. "It would be mercy, just end it." And how would you know which ones are really dying and which ones are waiting for you to get close enough? Pollock said. He'd come down the line, checking positions. How would you know which one has a grenade hidden, which one has a pistol? Johnson had no answer. None of us did. So we listened, and we waited for dawn. I need you to understand something. We weren't monsters. We weren't cruel. We weren't the kind of men who could listen to suffering and feel nothing, but we'd learned. General Vandergrift himself had written it down and would send it to headquarters later. These people refuse to surrender. The wounded will wait until men come up to examine them and blow themselves and the other fellow to pieces with a hand grenade. You can readily see the answer to that. 3 days before Tenaru, we had an incident at the defensive perimeter. Japanese officer, wounded, lying in the open. A Marine squad approached to take him prisoner. The officer shot one Marine with a concealed pistol before his weapon misfired. I tried to shoot 2 more. When the pistol failed completely, he killed himself. 2 days before, there was Wilson. The day before, a wounded Japanese sergeant appeared dead. 3 officers approached to check the body. He suddenly sat up and tried to shoot them. His pistol misfired. He immediately killed himself rather than be captured. This was the pattern. This was what we'd learned. It wasn't cruelty that kept us in our holes. It was survival. And underneath that, underneath the practical reasons, was something else. Something harder to talk about. A rage we'd discovered in ourselves. These men had attacked us. They'd tried to kill us. They'd succeeded in killing some of us, and now they were wounded and suffering. And maybe, just maybe, some part of us thought that was justice. I'm not proud of that part, but I'm done lying about it. War doesn't make you better. It shows you what you are when everything else is stripped away. What I am, what we all were that night, was afraid. Afraid of the wounded. Afraid of what would happen if we showed mercy. Afraid of becoming like Wilson, dead on the jungle floor because compassion got there before caution. So we stayed in our holes, and we listened, and we told ourselves it was orders, it was tactics, it was necessity, but it was also scary. And maybe that's the most honest thing I can tell you. Around 4 in the morning, the crocodiles came. You could hear them moving in the lagoon, that particular sound of something large moving through shallow water. They'd smelled the blood, all that blood in the water, all those bodies in the tide. A wounded Japanese soldier started screaming differently. Not pain screaming, but terror screaming. Something had him. Something was dragging him into the water. Should we? Someone started to say. No, I said. We listened to the crocodile kill him. Listened to the splashing, the thrashing, the screaming that got cut off mid-sound. Then silence. Then another crocodile moving toward another body. Sweet Jesus, Johnson whispered. Sweet Jesus Christ. But here's the thing I've never told anyone, the thing that makes me what I am. Part of me was grateful. Grateful for the crocodiles. Because every man they killed was one less man screaming, one less voice in the darkness, one less sound that would follow me home. And that's what war does. It makes you grateful for crocodiles eating dying men. It makes you find relief in horror. It makes you into something you didn't know you could become. One of our Marines, I won't say his name, said it out loud. At least they'll shut up now. Nobody disagreed. We never shot at the crocodiles. Treated them like river patrol. Let them do their work. One less scream, one less voice, one less sound to carry for the rest of your life. That's what I became that night on Guadalcanal. A man who was grateful for crocodiles. Around 05:45, the sky started to grey. It's not sunrise yet. That false dawn that comes before the real thing. Light enough to see shapes but not details. Light enough to start understanding what had happened. The sandbar was covered in bodies, not scattered, piled, clustered in front of our machine gun positions like cordwood. Like offerings, like a testament to the fact that courage cannot stop bullets. Some moved, not much. A hand lifting, a leg twitching, breath making chests rise and fall, still alive, still dying. Lieutenant Colonel Cresswell was leading the 1st Battalion upstream to ford the creek, to come around behind the Japanese position, to complete the encirclement. We could hear them moving through the jungle, the crash of men through undergrowth, the sound of equipment, orders being called out. The wounded Japanese must have heard it too, must have known what was coming, must have understood that there would be no rescue, no retreat, no salvation. Some of them started singing battle songs, death songs. I don't know what they were, but the melody was beautiful in a terrible way. Several voices, growing weaker, but still together, still holding the tune. Then Cresswell's battalion opened fire from the coconut grove. The Japanese, who could still fight, maybe 100, maybe less, returned fire. The wounded kept singing until the bullets found them, and then we heard something else. Engines, tank engines. 4 Stuart tanks came down the trail through the coconut palms. I watched them roll past our position. 30 tons of steel and fury, treads chewing up the sand, turret guns swiveling. Lieutenant Leo Case commanded them. I heard him on the radio later. Colonel Cates had ordered him to pull back, and Case had radioed, "Leave us alone, we're too busy killing Japs." That's what he said. That's what we'd become. The tanks rolled across the sandbar. didn't go around the bodies, didn't try to avoid them, just rolled right over them. The treads caught flesh and bone and pressed them down into the coral sand. I heard the sounds, everyone heard the sounds, the wet crunch of bodies being crushed, the screaming that suddenly stopped, the mechanical grinding of treads that should have been in a factory but was here, doing this, making meat out of men. Then the tanks pushed into the coconut grove, machine guns firing, canister rounds from the main gun, knocking down palm trees to flush out survivors, running down men who tried to flee. General Vandergrift watched it happen. Later he said something that became famous. That defined the battle. That defined the war we were fighting. He said, "The rear of the tanks looked like meat grinders." That's what he said. That's what they were. That's what we'd created. Meat grinders. By Oro 9, it was over. 800 dead, maybe more. The exact count was impossible. Too many bodies too destroyed to count properly. Too many pieces instead of people. 15 prisoners. Only one surrendered voluntarily. The rest were too wounded to resist, too unconscious to refuse. The rest had tried to die and failed. Our casualties, 44 dead, 75 wounded. The arithmetic of war, the mathematics of victory. Colonel Cates walked the battlefield that afternoon. He'd been at Belleau Wood in the First War, seen the worst Europe could offer. He said he'd never seen such a congestion of dead as what lay on that sandbar. Congestion of dead. Clean words for an unclean thing. The smell hit by noon. Tropical heat and bodies. That smell gets into your uniform, your skin, your lungs. You taste it with every breath. You can't wash it off. It follows you. Some Marines were already pulling gold teeth, taking souvenirs, flags, weapons, photographs from dead men's pockets, becoming scavengers, becoming something other than what they'd been when they shipped out from San Diego. I walked down to the sandbar, looked at what we'd done, at what they'd forced us to do, at what war had made of all of us. A crocodile was feeding on a body at the water's edge, half in the lagoon, half on the sand. I didn't shoot the crocodile, just watched it work. Someone had nicknamed that particular corpse Chowhound. Someone thought it was funny. Maybe it was. Maybe that's what passes for humor when you're 19 and you've just killed 800 men and listened to them die for 8 hours and watched tanks turn their bodies into ground meat. Maybe that's how you survive it. You make jokes. You take teeth, you give the bodies names and pretend they were never people. Or maybe you're like me. You walk the sandbar and try to memorize every face so you never forget what you did, what you became, what you are. Colonel Ichiki's body was never found. They think he committed suicide after the battle failed, cut his belly open with his own sword rather than face defeat. His journal was found in the debris. The entry for August 21st, enjoyment of the fruit of victory. He got the date right after all, but there was no enjoyment, no victory, no fruit, just the screaming that wouldn't stop until morning, and the silence that came after, which was somehow worse. The official reports called it the Battle of the Tenaru River. But it wasn't a river and it wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter, a meat grinder, a lesson written in blood about what happens when courage meets firepower, when spirit meets steel, when warriors meet Marines with machine guns. But we learned things too, things that would follow us through Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, things that would define how we fought every battle afterward. We learned that we couldn't approach wounded Japanese soldiers. That mercy was a luxury that got you killed. That compassion was something you left behind when you put on the uniform. We learned that war doesn't care about honor or courage or the warrior spirit. War cares about ammunition and positioning and who can kill faster. We learned that the sounds of dying men would follow us forever. That decades later, we'd still hear them in quiet moments, that no amount of whiskey or distance or time would make them go away. We learned that we were capable of things we never imagined, good things and terrible things, heroic things and monstrous things, sometimes simultaneously. And we learned that there's a difference between winning a battle and surviving it. We won at Tenaru River, killed 800 men for the loss of 44. Perfect arithmetic, but I don't know if any of us survived it. Not really. Not the part of us that mattered. Because that night, listening to them scream, listening to them die, listening to the crocodiles, waiting for dawn so the tanks could finish it, something changed in all of us. We learned what we were capable of, what we could endure, what we could become, and we learned that war doesn't end when the shooting stops. It ends when the last man who heard that screaming finally dies. Maybe that's why I'm still here, still telling this story, still trying to explain what happened on a sandbar in the Solomon Islands 80 years ago. Because someone needs to remember, someone needs to tell you what we did, what we became, what war makes of men when you strip away everything else. We didn't sleep that night. How could we? The sounds wouldn't let us. We didn't sleep the next night either, or the night after. because the sounds were still there, not real anymore. But memory is real enough. Some of the men broke, complete psychological collapse, talking to themselves, seeing things. One Marine shot at shadows for 3 hours straight before they pulled him off the line. Some of the men hardened, became efficient killers, good at the work, too good maybe, the kind of good that worried the rest of us, and some of us just carried it, put it in a box somewhere inside and tried to keep living, tried to pretend we were still the men we'd been before that night. But we weren't. We would never be again. I was there. I remember it. The sound, the silence, the smell. I remember the sandbar at 01:30 and the screaming that started and wouldn't stop. I remember the crocodiles and the tanks and the morning count. I remember 800 dead men and the sounds they made dying. I remember being grateful when the crocodiles came. I remember watching the tanks crush bodies and feeling nothing. I remember walking the battlefield and trying to memorize faces so I wouldn't forget what I'd done. War doesn't end. It only fades until someone else finds it again. Until then, I'll keep telling you what I saw, what I heard, what I became, when the dark returns, when the war returns, after dark.